these old cars, if you think about it, I mean, they've outlived nostalgia by, 50 years. So they've had to stand on their own as interesting things for quite a while now. And because a lot of cars, if you take nostalgia or context away, they don't always hold up so well. And time is the ultimate judge of all this stuff.
Hey, so welcome back to another episode of In the Driver's Seat with ABS. In our previous episode, you joined us in California, and we went to the new Singer U.S. headquarters, had a private tour, and we met with Tim Quarterbine from the Interior Department. If you haven't checked out that episode, be sure to head over to our YouTube or SoundCloud, Instagram, all that, and you can check out that latest episode that we did. Today, we're back on the East Coast with Evan Ide. He is a senior specialist with Bonhams, and he also owns HVS. I'd like to describe Evan as probably the pre-war whisperer.
Oh, I like that. I usually describe him as a god. That's what I usually...
Evan knows everything there is to know about pre-war cars, and his knowledge and enthusiasm for those cars and all vehicles is just infectious. And Evan, thank you so much for joining us today. And we're here in our storage facility. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Happy to be here.
If you can hear, it is raining, and it was like our second annual veteran car tour. And Evan, you were here for that. That was probably a very busy weekend for you.
For both the first and the second year, it was quite a busy weekend.
Yeah, it was. It was a busy 5 weeks actually, because there was 5 weeks preparing for the event, and then we had the auction on top of it, so it was really busy. But these, cars like this, you have to spend quite a bit of time, getting them ready and making sure everything is a-okay for the big day. So
talk to us a little bit about what you do and what you specialize in, and how you came to be the person that you are today.
Sure. So I have kind of a dual role. I work with Bonhams, have for a long time, 20 years, a little more, and have always been primarily focused on pre-war cars, especially pre-World War I cars, and I have a restoration shop as well that I spend most of my time in, and we focus on pretty exclusively on pre-World War II and earlier, but heavy on the pre-World War I cars. I think, I've, in the course of this, I always say I've sort of just stuck with a unfashionable niche, we'll say, in the business, where, I've basically just done what I've been interested in car-wise. I like all types of cars and different eras of cars, but my primary interest and focus is on these cars. And, because the car industry is so diverse and the segments are so different, it's really hard to water yourself down too much. It's like if you really want to do something right, you kind of have to stick with a particular area. So these are the ones that I find the most interesting, and I love the history and everything about this era. So a lot of people who aren't involved in these cars, think it's it is a small part just because there aren't that many cars compared to all the other cars in the hobby, but it's a very active segment of the market, and the enthusiasts are very passionate, and they use their cars a lot. So I keep very busy as a result, both on the auction side and the hands-on side. So and I got into it, I was always interested in growing up in any kind of vehicle, mechanical thing as a little kid, and obviously got into cars heavily as a teenager, and I was always wanted to have my hands on these old cars, but they're just not, if you don't grow up in a family with a bunch of old cars, you don't really have access to them. So I had cars that I thought were old, cars from the 60s, and people would give me, when I was in high school, they're 25 or 30 years old, and but I really wanted to get access to this other stuff. So I just read books and and I'll find out about it. And So after college, I had gone to study. I have an art degree, but I focused on museum study work. So I was going to work in a museum, was my idea, and I graduated. And then within a year, I was working at a transportation museum with a great early collection of cars. So I finally, I could never have envisioned that when I was in college that this was even an option. So then I finally got my hands on these cars, and I was kind of like, that was it. Kind of never looked back.
It's funny you mentioned that because until I started working here, I was never exposed to this early of a car.
Yep.
And
Same.
I think we talked about it, I think in our very first podcast where I was like, I've always loved Porsche. Porsche's always been, my brand, but I've really started to, and especially now, focus my attention towards the early stuff and the amount of passion that the owners have. And, a lot of people are intimidated by the cars, but the fact is they are actually more often than not simpler than a lot of, cars from the 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s. It's just, there were so many different varieties of the mechanical aspects, and that's kind of what makes it fun. So, I think I'm a younger guy, right? 33, but I feel like this is something that I can see myself really being passionate about for the the rest of my life. And I hope to see that, and you are seeing, like, for example, in our veteran car run, there was 26, 27-year-olds who were driving these really early cars, and
I think it's interesting you say that because, there's, in a way, the average age of the people bidding on these early cars we find are actually younger than the people buying the cars from the 60s.
Yeah.
With the traditional collector stuff in the marketplace, or what is now traditional. And if you look in this last auction, I think the fellow who bought the Thomas is probably in his early 50s at the most. And the Courier, is, I don't know if he's even 25.
Yeah, one of the best cars that was in the show.
He's absolutely hooked on. And I think, what you say, I think what's interesting about these cars and what gets a lot of people involved, and a lot of people get into it a little later in their collecting because they kind of get into what they're nostalgic about or what they wanted when they were younger. But then as they learn more about cars and appreciate them in a little bit more complicated way, they figure out what's interesting about this stuff and realize they don't have a direct connection to it. But it's a very interesting subject, and the stuff is really nice. And if you really like machinery and like really quality machinery, this era is the best for that. There's never an era where things are made in a higher quality or more expensive manner than the high-end stuff of this era. You don't find cars aren't, the engine bays aren't full of bronze and brass and copper and, just over-the-top quality. And because cars were, you do a currency conversion or, one of these inflation things, and it doesn't really translate to accurately how expensive cars were then. And the reason, there was this was the era of absolute price is no object for cars. They'll just make the best possible car no matter what. And somebody will buy it because, the absolute wealthiest people wanted cars. They were the market. And as a result, they just did this stuff that would never, ever fly today as far as the amount of expense they went to make these cars and it's over the top quality to the point of putting these companies out of business, even though they're selling.
And the intention was, and these are essentially the first collector cars there were, right?
Yeah.
So, I don't think that was kind of the intention, like you were saying, but the cars that have survived, when they were being built, they were never, I don't think there was ever an intention that they would be running to this day, but.
Exactly. And a cool point, though, of the really early days is this, the car industry started as an enthusiast thing. There were no practical cars in the day. It was all high performance is what they wanted. If you look at the cars they had in Newport and the races in Newport, these were the wealthiest guys. They were buying ex-works racing cars out of Europe in 1900, 1901, paying $15,000, $20,000 a pop for these things. So there was, there was no regular cars. It was all just the best, coolest
Components.
stuff. So in a way, it kind of like, started with just the very coolest cars, and then kind of as things got a little bit cheaper, it filled out with practical cars. But it starts very much as an enthusiast hobby.
Yeah.
And they're not a practical thing, cars at that point.
Yep. I think, Evan, I think it's safe that I can speak for all of us that we're kind of all in awe of your knowledge.
Yeah.
And I think we relate to you because you're a younger guy and you're doing this with older cars. Can you talk to us about the learning process that you've gone through, whether that started as a kid or as a teenager, and how? Because for me, when I got to the museum, I'm into this stuff. I'm looking at an Evo 2 Mercedes, a Ferrari, and I had trouble learning in high school, right?
Yep.
And then once you learn more about cars and how engines work and how that relates to everything about the car, you understand, at least for me, how to learn and how to compound information.
Sure.
How has that process been for you? And I'm sure it still continues today.
Yeah, and that's one of the things I find engaging about this period is that you can't exhaust it.
Right.
It's so,
it never ends.
And at a certain point, I would say kind of by the time a Model A Ford rolls along, they basically have the car figured out at that point. It has most of the stuff a car today has. But before that, and particularly early on, nothing had been established. Everyone was trying everything. And there were just, if you look at even in New England alone, there were, approximately 1,500 car builders in New England.
There were some in Newport, very small
tiny
manufacturers,
little-
made 2 or 3 cars. Yep.
So if you think, even if you're just interested in all the different types of cars, you could never, never explore all of them. And there was a good chance in those early days they were all like really different from each other too, and they were just trying everything. So it's, very engaging in that way where you're always finding something new as you research. But as far as I always say the knowledge comes from interest. And I was, particularly in high school, terrible student and was not good at.
If you relate, say I.
And I have a very difficult time going to a class that I don't have any interest
Me
in.
too. Oh,
And-
man.
And back then we had like 8. The class at high school was broken down in 8 periods
Yeah.
a day. So you had 8 different classes. I was interested in one of them.
You're giving me PTSD.
Gross.
How is Sean here right now?
I don't know how I graduated high school.
I,
to be honest.
I did much better in college because I could just do one
Me too,
thing.
actually.
Focus on
Yeah,
what
yeah,
you
yeah.
like.
That was
yeah.
fine. But so I have no problem consuming lots of information about something I'm interested in.
Yep.
And I think the cool thing from a mechanical standpoint with the early era is that you have to break it down into its most basic things. And it's kind of cool if you read some of the books too. There's a great book Hiram Percy Maxim published in like 1898, I think, about his work in the automobile industry. And it begins with him with a dish of gasoline and like lighting it just to see how much energy there was in that little bit of gasoline. And it's like we don't step back from cars that often and do that and think
Yeah.
about where it all starts. Like what is this fluid and what kind of force does it create?
Yeah.
And I think the cool thing with a lot of these early cars, it really gets you back into perspective about what the kind of technological marvel of cars is. Because you drive a single cylinder early car, you feel every explosion, and everything you do with the controls has a direct response on that motor. So even though they're not responsive in a fast, modern kind of way, they're extremely responsive because everything you do makes a difference, and you can see to the pants, feel
Very
everything.
connected to the car.
Extremely. And I think that's one of the things with the cars that a lot of people really enjoy is that you get this relationship with your car and connection with your car if you drive it a lot. You really figure out how to make that car sing. And, the shifting is another thing too. You really learn what that car likes and how you can work it. And my friend of mine, Robert Brooks, who was sort of started Bonhams years ago, but he was a great race car driver. But he was every year London and Brighton guy, real early car enthusiast, and he would relate it to driving like a Formula race car. He drove an 1895 Peugeot primarily, and he had taken so much time and studied that car. And this is a car that has no throttle, no spark control. It's hot tube ignition with a governor. So there's nothing you can do to regulate the engine while you're driving it. It has a 4-speed sliding gear transmission with a clutch. So the idea, the challenge of running this thing through the gears silently when you have no ability to blip the throttle or do anything.
God.
And he could do that. He could run that car through perfect. And he could make that car like sing and get as much performance as you could get out of that thing. And he like flew down to Brighton in this car, which is like the oldest car in the run. And it's very engaging experience, to mastery of these things.
And I think that's what you lose a little bit. And we've talked about this too. That now you can get a 1,000 horsepower Ferrari, and you go and you're going 130 miles an hour. You don't even realize it. There's no engagement, anymore. It seems like
there's no challenge.
Exactly, and like you said, there's certain cars that we get to drive in this collection that you feel, not to that extent, but you feel like you know what you're doing. You're satisfied. You're like, I can actually drive a car. I feel like I have some skill here. But and I think that's the biggest thing I've noticed with these cars. And then there's a whole different level of what you do where, like for example, your Thomas that you have, that, when was the last time that ran before you?
Like a long time ago, that one.
There's like no record of
no, I don't think it's ever been on an event in collector times.
So wow. And then getting that to run, the sasatisfaction of here, and then running it, and then that's a whole thing in of itself, and it runs perfect. And I do enjoy that. I like, it's fun reviving these cars. We had to do that a lot over the years, and getting something that's been idle for a long time, and getting it to kind of come back to life, and is a lot of fun. And then make it really run well is great. And it's something you can't. It's much harder to do with later stuff. Like I can pull a car out of odds are if you get something from pre-World War I that's been languishing, there's a good chance I can have that thing running, unless there's something seriously wrong with it, pretty quickly. And maybe you have to put a remote gas tank on it or something like that. But it's a fun thing, and even a crank start car, the procedure, you get a feel for what these things want, and it's a lot of fun. I like that. Making them, you can kind of sort of a two-step project. You sort of can get them working, but then there's usually a few months of fiddling with everything else to make them really dialed. Rebushing stuff and fixing little problems to make them work their best. But I love that aspect of getting something back to life. And they all have their own, everything all these different cars have their own personality too. They all they sound so different, they act different, so they're kind of fun. When you have something, its personality is so widely different from the next thing you have, and that's something that's really lost later on because things become much more standardized, and there isn't, even by the 20s, there isn't that variety of how cars run. They're all pretty standard at that point, and they're smoother, they're better, they're more reliable, but doesn't mean they're more fun. Yeah.
I like what you said earlier about how, at least with the auction that we had here, how there were some younger people involved in purchasing these cars and driving these cars. Mm-hmm. How important is it for you, at least with your work, to pass on your knowledge and what you know to the next generation about these cars?
I think it's very important. I think it's important to pass on what makes them interesting too, and get, because I think if you get people interested in them, the knowledge will come for those people too. So getting kind of relating the things that I enjoy about these cars to other people and getting them interested in it is very satisfying, because usually once you get them interested, then they get that kind of thirst for knowing more.
Yeah.
And most of the guys who I work with in my shop are all younger and all into this stuff. And, it's funny. do the selection committee for Pebble Beach, and the two of us do the selection for this era cars, and we're both by far the youngest on that group. So we're selecting the oldest cars. So I think we find, because, you know, these old cars, if you think about it, I mean, they've outlived nostalgia by, 50 years. So they've had to stand on their own as interesting things for quite a while now. And because a lot of cars, if you take nostalgia or context away, they don't always hold up so well. And time is the ultimate judge of all this stuff. And time has been pretty kind to these things, for with nobody alive who had a direct connection to these things in period, they still remain very captivating to people.
I feel like a lot of, at least older folks that I talk to, are really afraid of the car hobby dying out. And a lot of conversations I have, they're like, oh, it's so rare that, you're 25 and you love all kinds of cars. And my response to that, and we talk about this a lot on the podcast, is it's not true at all. I mean, there's a lot of young guys like us that we know of through the museum and going to Cars and Coffee and all this stuff, that they love cars and they love all kinds of cars. I think for us, both of you had mentioned earlier that we didn't really know too much about this stuff before we started working here, but having experienced these cars, I mean, I went for a ride in the veteran tour in a 1902 Yale, and going over the Mount Hope Bridge, I'm looking over the edge, and I was like, oh, that wouldn't be good, but it was fun. And we weren't even, it's not like, you're in a McLaren doing 200 miles an hour, like you doing what, 30? And it was still so much fun.
Well, and sorry to cut you off, but for me, it was like, when you're into this stuff and then you start to draw the lineage back and really connect the dots, that's when you, for me at least, who had no interest in this stuff 10 years ago, that's when you really start to, put the decades together and start to understand how everything came together until present day. And there's a direct connection to that.
And I think they say, in life, most of the things that are really interesting are the things you have to really learn about. Whether it's fine art or wine or any of these things that are kind of complicated, but the enjoyment comes from that getting really the deep dive. I think what I've noticed is, there's cars that people want for nostalgic reasons, and then there's cars people want for reasons they've engaged more deeply with. And I think, the relationship people get with these cars, I think, tends to be a deeper one, because it's not just, oh man, I wanted one of those like when I was 16, it was on the wall of my room, but it's like, no, I want this because it's such a significant thing, and look at the engineering in this thing, look at the quality. And I think it ends up being a more sort of lasting, enduring relationship. And a lot of people have both. It's like and I'm not criticizing one end of it or another. I have cars from all different eras. I just think there's just two different approaches to the reason for collecting. And I think the reason a lot of this stuff doesn't trade hands until people die is because they don't want to sell it, because they get these relationships and they're not replaceable to them. The only time we ever get Thomas Flyers or this great stuff in an auction is usually when someone dies, because no one, the car, even though they're very valuable, they're still much more interesting than the money.
I agree. Yeah. And that's why I always love going to your shop, because there's always something I'll never probably ever see again.
Yeah. Well, speaking of going to Evan's shop, I knew we'd find a way to weave Porsche in sometime.
Oh,
but
yes,
you're building a cool car for your son, it seems like.
I did. I got when my son.
How old's your son?
He's 4.
Yep.
And when he was born, I bought a 914 Porsche.
Cool.
Because it has seatbelts.
Nice.
Which is the one problem with an old car, and you can't really mess around with 4-year-old or infant safety, not driving around with seatbelt, other than driving around the parking lot or something in an old car. So I found in one of we were dispersing a museum collection, and in there was a one-owner California, always in LA 914 74 Saturn yellow, and I always liked those cars. I was never super interested in 911s or anything like that. I always liked 914s. So I had to paint it. It has no rust, and that was one of the things that I never bought a 914, because they're always rusty, and I don't really think they're that restorable. So So found this really rust-free car, painted it. It's got a good original interior, and I took the motor out, had a fair number of miles on it, and then just built a 2.1 liter motor in it, and I think this is a great little car. It's
So
really
is
fun.
last time I saw it, it was getting there.
It's on the road. It's
Oh,
driving.
great.
Oh,
Yeah,
cool.
we've been driving
Good.
around.
That's
Yep.
fantastic.
Yeah, it's been cool to see the progression of that car
Yeah.
from the
Yeah.
paint shop to Theo driving it.
The hardest thing is the hardest
He's
thing
there. He'll be there in like a year or two, no problem.
He's totally into it. It's his car, as he says. And,
Yeah.
Oh, that's cool.
no, it's really good. It's probably about the same horsepower as a 6,
Yeah.
but it's a torqueier thing.
Yeah.
Oh,
it's
cool.
It's very drivable. It's
Well,
really fun.
And that's about the age I really started to get into it. Like I've said before, I remember seeing an NSX in the parking lot when I was 3, and it was kind of like, that
Oh,
was
yeah.
it.
Yeah, yeah.
But to me, like being in the museum, I always tell kids who come up, like, you know, we hear it a lot, and it's really cool to hear, like, oh, you've got such a cool job. It's like, yeah, we do. And you may not end up here at this museum, but if you're interested in these Mercedes or BMWs or Porsches, and you translate that knowledge, you know, you can have a job like this for life. I mean, cars are never going to go away.
Yeah.
And, you know, but the stressful thing is, I was at a shop recently, and one of the guys at the shop was, you know, we can't get no help. Like, we don't have guys who are experienced enough in this department to give us help. And to me, it's just translating that interest, and you can be well paid doing something you really enjoy every day of your life.
Right. Oh, absolutely. And, you know, to get back to the point you were making, which goes along with this, about the older guys saying, you know, getting new people in. Of
course.
The only people who say that are old guys.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Because they don't really interact
get
with
it,
the other
yeah.
people.
Yeah, yeah.
And it's, you know, and they've been saying that for 60 years.
Yeah.
You know,
Right.
and it's, I find it really, and that's like the biggest pet peeve I have. It's
Ooh.
like, you know, you're not involved in this stuff.
It's like,
you don't
dude,
realize.
I literally,
perfect.
I've said multiple times before, all of my friends are car guys.
Yeah, and
It's like all of them.
Go to
There's something else
Are
to
they
talk about.
interested
go
in
to
this?
Pebble
No,
Beach.
but-
Go to the Pebble
Yeah.
Beach Polo Fields parking lot.
Oh, it's nuts.
I mean, how many kids with cameras are there?
It's
like
stupid.
Hundreds of
It's
them.
like annoyingly stupid.
It's. I mean, yeah, it's not.
And
Go
I-
to the Cars and Coffee, like the one you had
Yeah.
a couple of years ago with the show. I mean, was there like 800 cars?
Yeah.
there?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's the biggest one we have.
Yeah.
And like
During
you
the
said, it's
Motor
just with this stuff, it's just exposure.
It is.
Yes.
And I never thought I would love it as much as I do. And the Veteran Car Tour has become probably my favorite event that we do. And, you know, a lot of it is, you know, Lee, our mechanic, you've worked closely with.
Sure.
He's learned a lot. And he loves the stuff now, too. And it's just fun being able to, you know, ride along with either him or you. And cars break down. It's part of the deal. But fix them. Like, put a new tube in a tire, you know, something's wrong with spark or whatever, and just get them going again, and they continue. And these cars are so resilient.
Yeah.
And there's so many things that, you know, you can diagnose and easily fix on the road with a toolkit this big. And I think that's, for me, the most satisfying part is just seeing the satisfaction from someone getting their car going again,
Yeah.
because it's something that we don't do anymore. We don't fix cars anymore.
Right.
We swap parts. We bring the car to a shop. You're not even allowed to fix your car anymore. It will void the warranty, whatever it may be. And, you know, it's that hands-on satisfaction. It's pouring rain, and we're continuing on.
It's an adventure.
Yeah.
Like
Yep.
you can drive 30 miles and it's an adventure.
Yeah.
You know, you can't say that much about later cars.
No.
And that little Dirac there, I mean, that had not been on a car event in 70 years, that car.
Yeah,
So it was the
that's
first
crazy.
time it had been out. And no, it's that's the thing. I always say, like, you get, even to the finish of this, you feel like, you know, you've accomplished something when you see the checkered flag.
Yeah.
One
Well,
of these things.
I've told this story before, not the first veteran car run. The event basically ends, and an hour and a half later, I'm here at our car storage facility, and I get a call from Sean. Evan's broken down on Wapping. He needs this, that, and the other thing.
Cotter pins.
Cotter
Cotter
pins.
pins. So I'm like, don't know what that is, but here I go. And get Evan the cotter pins, whatever. He gets the car running again, and he's on his way. And then Sean calls me. He's like, hey, you know, it's 6 o'clock. Everybody's been there for 2 hours. Like, why don't you just lead him back to storage? I'm like, dude, he is making it to the finish. It's like, you know, they're going to do it. They're going to finish the whole thing, and that's the adventure of it.
That's cool.
Absolutely. And my car, everyone in the car, the average age was,
Yeah.
22.
Yeah.
And there was no way they weren't
Oh,
getting,
no way.
Like,
Yeah, no.
It was
And
100%.
you pull in with that little thing and pull right up, pop, 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 and you turn it off, and everyone's like, changed, showered, drinking champagne. Like, where were you?
Ben Chester and I are dead on the side of the road. That's part of the adventure. I think this year was, our cars, we had more preparation for our cars because, a lot of the cars that we ran the first one we acquired shortly before, and naturally they hadn't run in a little while, but that was a whole adventure in itself. But
the 1 week, get
yeah,
them all
the 1 week,
running.
yeah, we
Hello.
were like, it was like our shop was like a hospital triage after.
Yeah,
like,
Evan had a
massive
hammock
event.
hanging
Yeah,
from
it
the
was-
ceiling.
I was
Just sleeping there.
that was rough.
Yeah. We love you.
but like I said, part of the Audrain, and we want to expose people to as many different generations or iterations of cars as we possibly can, and I think this is veteran car tour. Is slowly going to become one of the most popular events. Not slowly, I should say, but.
Well, they don't drive quickly.
Yeah, that's true. But why don't you
Some
talk
of them
about
do.
the
Yeah,
London
true.
to Brighton? For
Yeah.
those who don't know, that's the longest running, if you will, event, and
Yep.
it
Oldest.
kind of sets the tone of cars that are sold pre 1904, right?
Yeah. So the London to Brighton Run happens every year in London in the first Sunday of November. And it's the oldest continuous car event in the world. The revival of it is 1927 to now. And it's only for cars made before 1905, so 4 and earlier. And it's probably the event, I don't think there's any event you'd go on that has more cars. It's I've been on it years, there's been 500 cars. So
That's
you've got
incredible. 500 cars from pre 1905.
pre-1905. Yep. And they're all, there's, the beginning of it starts in Hyde Park, and all the cars are lined up there coming in to do this thing. So you've got, 400 to 500 of these cars lined up, oil lamps lit, steam cars, gas cars, electric cars, coal-fired cars. I mean, the whole gamut. And most of them are completely full of people. And everyone sets off and waves down to Brighton, right out into London traffic. They close the part in front of Buckingham Palace. You get this cool drive at the beginning, but then you're off, like everyone else on a Sunday morning. And it's 72 miles, and it goes from the city to
my
the coast.
God.
So
It's insane.
So it's you see everything. You start right in the middle of a city, one of the big, biggest cities there are, and you're out into the country, and then you finish at the water. So you get like the full experience of like the English landscape. And the whole time you're driving with old cars, because it's like there's 500.
so many of them,
So,
yeah.
you see them ahead. And in addition to those cars, every car club in the world is there too. So they're driving along, the Mini Club, the Land Rover Club, the, whatever, Aston Martins, or they have taken over a pub with all their cars.
Yeah.
And then they're spectators the whole way. So like you get a nice day, there's like kids
awesome.
and families the whole way. And there's some really big hills and challenging terrain. And yeah, you get to the end of that thing and it's like serious adventure.
Yeah. And most of the cars make it, right?
Very low attrition rate
Yeah.
there. Yeah. It's less than 10%.
Wow.
And the, and that event has always kept cars of that era quite valuable because you need one of those cars to do the event. And the more prestigious or better known cars of that era, the earlier cars that start early are very valuable because everyone, they want to start at the beginning and they want a capable car and but the Oldsmobiles, the curved dash olds, are probably the most common thing on it. They're good cars, but it's it's slightly biased, but most people who do it say it's like the best event in cars because it's just like there's nothing like it. And the lineup at the beginning, you'll never see a better group of cars anywhere. I mean, the quality of the cars is just phenomenal.
Yeah.
Like it is, and it's so, and there again, the average age is way less than if you go on like most car events.
Yeah.
They'll be like young families, baby seats in the cars, and teenagers, and it's much more of like a family thing with a wide variety of ages. So it's just such a generational thing. It's been going on for years and years, really ingrained over there. So,
Well, that's what I liked about, you mentioned the start line there and the whole route. There's people watching it. That's what was awesome about at least this event is it was pouring rain, and seeing all the people outside, especially when we started on Bellevue and then pretty much the whole route, people were so excited to see these cars.
Yeah.
I feel like with maybe supercars or something else, you might not get the same.
Well, and it's like,
Yeah.
these
People are-
a lot of people
yeah.
think of these cars sitting dusty in museums,
they're
which just
paperweights.
isn't true. And then,
Yeah.
then you see them and smell them
Oh, yeah.
and watch them in motion, and it's a
Yeah.
totally different experience.
and they're very friendly
Yeah.
cars. I think
They are,
I think
yeah.
people find them. No one is offended by. It's not like the swarm of Lamborghinis with all that. They all have that same exhaust noise. It's not that some people are into. A lot of people
Yeah.
aren't. But these things, everyone stops and it's just like.
Yeah.
Because you just don't ever see this.
You never
this
see
might.
them.
A lot of these people probably have never seen a car from that era in their life.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
here it is moving.
Yeah.
The
Stanley with the steam whistle, and like
Yep.
it's just like
Oh,
What is
people
happening?
love that.
yeah, it's just like so cool.
It's
you know?
just it's and you think too from the standpoint of you're seeing this thing, and there isn't much of that era of time that you can actually see in operation like that. Like you
Yeah.
don't even see locomotives that
No.
early that you could get on. You certainly there really aren't very many aircraft. And most of that is going to be after 1907 or 8. So to see an actual mechanical thing from 1901 or 1902 that's in operation and operating exactly like it did
Yep.
when it was made, and to drive it, you're experiencing something identical experience to
Yeah.
what, aside from better roads.
Yeah, I was about to say our roads, aren't the best, but compared
Oh.
to 1901 or 02,
stellar.
Slightly better in Rhode
Yeah.
Island.
and it's funny too. A lot of people, a common question I'm sure you get too is like, oh, what kind of fuel do you put in it? What kind of gas do you put in it? Well, think about
Yeah.
the gas now versus
I
the
know.
fuel in 1901, 1902. These things are living the dream right now.
That's
They
exactly.
absolutely love
That's exactly. I always get that question. That one and the oil, same
Yeah.
living the dream on the oil, especially. And yeah, there's two things you always get. You always get the question about the gas and the
Yeah.
oil, that sort of spark plugs, which are the easiest thing you can get on an old car. But then it's always about starting it and putting your thumb, like turning your thumb in. Everyone always tells me this. Make sure you put your thumb over when you're starting the car.
I was like, thanks,
started
pal.
like
Yeah.
1,000
I know.
antique cars. Like, I don't know where that one came from, but
Well,
it's
yeah.
like, oh, you'll break your thumb off.
Yeah. Well, I
Still
yeah.
have both of them.
It is funny, like
A miracle.
standing around Evan during the Bonhams auction, which was I think very successful, and I
Oh,
hope for you guys you
huge.
enjoyed it as much as we did.
Huge.
We're, you can see we're
Everything's
getting
sold.
we're getting our cars.
That was
Yeah.
a huge success.
Yeah, we're getting our cars back in the building, so it's starting to look like car storage again. But it was fun standing next to you because you were bidding for certain customers, and then the Thomas sells, and a gentleman comes up and he's like, and gives you his card, and he was like, I know this car. You need to call me. I know everything about it. I know how it runs. I know how it. I'm just standing there like. This is it's just like the amount of times it happens though to Evan. I mean, I'm sure it's like there's no one better in the world to work on this car, and you have people coming up all the time, these old timers who are like,
Careful of your thumb.
yeah, careful of your thumb, make sure you put
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Well, and in some cases like that one, it's not even to work on it; it's to modify it.
Yeah,
and that's
yeah.
my ultimate pet peeve of this is
Yeah.
the changing and modifying these things.
Well, you always talk about Wintons and
Yeah.
how they run,
Yeah.
and people say, "Oh, they're so complicated," but like other cars from the era, they've just got a certain way of operating.
And it's not even that it's complicated; it's just that it's different. It's actually very,
You just
very
got to understand
simple.
how it works and
Yeah.
tap into that mindset.
Exactly. We run into this with the working on the cars a lot. Until you really understand it, you can't do anything. It's kind of like when we have to make something or reproduce something. Unless you figure out how they made it the first time, you're not
Yeah.
going to make it right.
Yeah.
So you actually have to really get involved in it and understand it. And the knee-jerk reaction for years in this hobby was just to change things, not learn about them or be like, oh, this carburetor, this will never work. Let's stick a Briggs & Stratton carburetor on or something. And
Yeah.
you know, and one thing with these cars is you will never find a car, or maybe there's some oddball out there or something, that just had no miles on it because it didn't work. You know, all these cars got driven a lot. And so there's no reason they can't work today in that same form.
There's also nothing wrong with driving cars. I feel like there's such a thing with so many collector cars where it's just like, oh, it's got 4 miles. It's like, great. Now you're going to have to redo the whole car before you can actually drive it.
Use it.
Well, there was just a guy who craned his McLaren Senna race car onto his, 90th penthouse floor.
Oh, nice.
And it's like, I don't know if it's a money thing, they don't want to run them, or it's like they don't know how to maintain them, but it's like the more you get oil through the system and keep everything lubed, the better it is. And it's not
also, like, you're not going to take any of it with you when you're dead, so like you might as well enjoy it. Like,
you get buried in it.
Yeah, you could do that.
Yeah, there you go. Well, let it run again, though.
The good thing about this era, there's very few accurate odometers.
Yeah,
so it's like no one cares.
It doesn't matter, right?
Yeah.
It's just 1904. That's the only thing.
I know. There is a lot of silly, you know, it's a big, and it's funny because the hobby starts here, you know, in the 30s with this stuff, because that's all there was. And, you know, this stuff is still here and still active, but this hobby has just gotten so gigantic around this. And I think people confuse this stuff as not being popular with the fact that they've just been sort of engulfed by, and you have to put it in perspective. If you look at these older cars, I mean, how many really great antique cars are there in the U.S.? You know, I think there might be 100, 150 really, really great, like, significant antique cars. So, I mean, that's of all the brands and types.
Yeah,
and you think of all the antique cars there are, period, you know, to count, you know, Model Ts and other stuff in there, there's still probably less than there are 65 Mustangs. So the whole segment of the hobby is like tinier than one model year of a later car. And
I always use the analogy of, if you go on Wikipedia and look up defunct automobile manufacturers, there's like hundreds of them, man. Like, you'd never heard of this crap. Yeah,
thousands and thousands and thousands.
Same
They
with
were all over the
motorcycles.
place.
It's the same thing with
Well,
motorcycles.
I'm glad you said that, because in Pebble last year,
Yep.
Ben and I were following the tour in our rapid fast Toyota Camry or Corolla, whatever it
You
was.
should have seen me in that thing.
Dude,
Evan.
he was banging that thing off the rev
We need a
limiter.
Corolla tour. Oh my god. Anyways.
But you were driving. I don't remember what it was.
Oh
but
my God.
You were driving or riding a
Yep.
trike, and we're
I forgot
going
about
up.
this.
What was it, on the coast?
Big
we're getting
Sur.
like to a spot where you can film the cars going by, and here we see you up this hill, and I was like, oh my god, he made it so far.
Yeah, I was riding an all original 1900.
We need a video of that for this.
Yeah. I think
you won't believe it.
I think I have a photo.
Well,
of
Evan
you.
will have one or
Yeah.
something.
Didion Bouton
Okay.
Trike, and a Trike back then would have been considered like a car.
Death trap.
And it's a, you know, basically sort of a bicycle almost with a widened back with 2 wheels but a big engine. That thing
Similar
has
to like the patent wagon,
kind
setup?
of like
a trike,
But
like
it's
a
got
motorcycle.
but it's got
okay.
a regular
It doesn't
motor
have a tiller,
bicycle seat and steering and no suspension. So it's quite tippy, you know, as trikes are in any steering. But this one, being the late one, has the big engine. It's like a car engine on the back of it.
There
So-
you are.
So you couldn't. The trick with riding that thing is
Did
that
the whole tour on that
You had a
thing.
helmet though. That's good.
I did have a helmet.
Yeah, that saved them,
60
yeah.
miles.
60. Did the whole
But
tour.
the tricky thing with that thing is that, oh yeah, there it is. Yeah.
Oh yeah, we passed him.
yeah,
Oh
there's
my
the
god,
hill.
that's Evan.
Yeah, those hills were tough.
Ben and I both freaked out. We were like, oh my god, there he is.
You cannot steer that machine with the engine running.
Seriously?
Because
Yeah.
it lifts the front tire.
It's so powerful. Yeah.
So to steer, you have to kill one of the twists kills the ignition. So you could steer, and then you could turn the ignition back on while you're still moving, because it's direct drive, so it doesn't have any gears
That's
or
crazy.
clutch. So every time you stop, you have to pedal it to restart. So, which is, you know, all well and good for sort of riding around where you have some momentum.
So
but
you did like the Tour de France by the end of it from like
There's a lot of
pedaling.
Tour de
pedaling, yeah.
France. More than that.
The uphills were really hard because you're switchbacks and you need the engine running. So you had to like lean way out on the handlebar to keep your weight
Yeah.
low,
So
you know,
it
keep it
wouldn't-
from hopping,
yeah.
so you could steer it around. But the worst part was on the way back, because if you get stuck in traffic, you have to pedal because it doesn't go slow.
Well, that's
Like,
where we saw Evan on the hills, and it's like if you haven't seen the Pebble Beach tour on Highway 1, it is. They're some of the best roads
That's
if you're in a
really
real
nice.
car. But it's like,
Yeah.
I couldn't ride a bike 15 miles up there without just tapping out.
Oh, I had to pedal like the last 4 miles
Ugh.
because it was so there just wasn't enough. There's too many cars in front of me to get it running. Because
Yeah.
it'll go like 15 is the slowest it'll go, and so it's all hills like into Pebble, into where the finish was. Just like, and there's no way to disengage the engine. So when you're pedaling it uphill, you're turning the engine over, as well
yeah.
as this
Oh my
150
God.
pound trike. So it was a bit of a workout, and yeah, though I did get, as I'm rolling and like pedaling the last bit, they're having the lunch for everyone finished. I didn't realize it was
Yeah.
over here at the Mercedes thing.
Yep.
And they suddenly like burst into applause and like all this cheering. I was like, what?
You're like, can I
Is
get
that
my
for me?
You're like, can I get my hat now? I think I earned this hat.
I did, yeah. I did. It's, and yeah, I
For those
did.
who don't know, the tour hats are the most valuable things at Pebble Beach.
Evans is from 2016.
Yeah.
Oh,
right
yeah,
now.
I get the,
Yeah.
yeah. I've had a pretty.
Every year you see Evan with the brand new hat on.
I-
It's like, it's
I-
gotta, how many of those do you have?
I have a lot of these. Yeah, I've done the tour every year for a while.
cool.
And that was. I didn't realize when I did it. I didn't realize it would be such a big deal. But like everyone was talking about it. Like
That's so
everywhere I
cool.
went,
That's
they
awesome.
were like bringing up the. It was funny, but it was quite an adventure. But it certainly made that. Just shows like you can take that Pebble tour, which in a more modern car is probably pretty run of the mill,
Yeah.
and turn it into like a genuine adventure. You know, by riding or taking something old.
That's so cool.
Well,
And that's the oldest thing to ever do the tour.
I think that's probably a good place to end, and pretty much sums you up perfectly, because you want an adventure, and every time that we see you and talk to you, there's always some sort of adventure, and I think that that's something to strive towards. And you know,
Yeah.
thank you so much for taking the time to come out here and tell us some of your stories, and you know, we always learn stuff from you.
I think
and-
the great thing about Evan is you spend 2 minutes with him and you've learned something.
Yep.
It's like he
Yeah.
just has the ability to educate naturally, and that's really cool to
Yeah.
be around.
Yeah, we really appreciate it, and we hope, of course, with all the help for the veteran tour and the Bonhams auction, we hope that that continues, and
Yeah, looking forward to next
we'll have
year.
that relationship. And
Absolutely.
yeah, to reiterate, it's always a good day for me when I go to your shop. My wife, I think, gets tired of me talking about Evan, but it was nice for her to meet you, because she knows
maybe
I
she's
talk
getting
about
a
you
little
so much.
worried.
Hello.
Well, it was great event this year. I'm looking forward to next year's, and we'll have to sneak into like a veteran tour into the Motor Week.
That's true.
That'd
We
be
should.
great.
We'll do an under. Yeah, let's do that. That's actually a good idea.
That'd be great.
I would love that. A little parade.
Yeah,
Yeah. So.
they're
Well, Evan, thank you so much. If you're watching this video, remember to like, subscribe, comment, share. If you're listening to it, we're on all of the major streaming platforms for podcasts. And if you want to watch a video on our veteran car tour, it's going to be being released May 30th on our YouTube channel. It's a really long video that we did on the whole tour. A ton of interviews, great footage. So keep an eye out for that. As always, like, subscribe, comment, share. Said that twice. We'll catch you in the next one.
Like, subscribe, comment, share.
3 times.